Hello, this is Court Watch with Alex Swoyer, and I'm excited to bring you the latest episode of my podcast, where I am joined by Peter Schweizer, the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Invisible Coup, president of Government Accountability Institute, and host of the Drill Down podcast. His thorough research has exposed the dangers of mass migration, and it comes at peak timing given the Supreme Court's review of birthright citizenship. The investigative author joins me now to discuss. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining me to talk about this important issue. I just wanted to say I think that your book comes at peak timing. Okay, I was in the Supreme Court for the birthright citizenship arguments earlier this year, just recently, actually. And I think it's gotten a lot of Americans talking about this issue. And one of the questions that came up during oral arguments that I kind of wanted to get you to react to, given your deep dive into mass migration and the way different countries are utilizing our immigration laws, is the Chief Justice posed a question to the Solicitor General about how significant a problem birthright tourism is. And I think John Sauer said something like, 500 birth tourism companies are in China. I think he estimated that there's could be 1 to 1.5 million people from the Republic of China utilizing this. But then Robert said something like, you agree that shouldn't be part of the legal analysis. What do you make of that? Shouldn't it be?
Yeah, I think it absolutely should, because, as has been said multiple times, Alex, the U.S. Constitution is not a suicide pact. And really, what you are talking about here, if you're going to adopt the position that birthright citizenship is absolute, that anybody who steps a big toe across the Rio Grande, anybody who flies in, gives birth, and then heads back home, their children are going to be U.S. citizens. That is a suicide pact. Those numbers of 500 birth tourism companies comes from my book. We researched it. They are openly advertising in China. The Chinese Communist Party is encouraging members of the CCP elite to do this. Imagine that. And the number of 1 million to 1.5 million quote unquote US citizens, young people being raised in China right now because of birth tourism, is also from the book. And that comes from Chinese estimates themselves. Our federal government has no idea how big the problem is. The Chinese
Just
themselves say that these are what the numbers are. So it is,
you
in effect, a suicide pact if
like
we
that.
don't factor this in.
And then in the book, I know you mentioned a little bit about that you go through different chapters and you name some of these adversaries. You just mentioned CCP. You also discussed, I think, Mexico, Muslim Brotherhood. I guess, is there what's the most shocking thing you uncovered? And is there one particular, we just talked about China, but is there one that you think is worse than the others?
A great question. The part I think that was most shocking to me, aside from the China industrial scale exploitation of birth tourism, is Mexico. Because I've traveled to Mexico. As a lot of Americans consider, okay, the Mexican government's corrupt, but they're kind of hapless. What emerged in the research, in their own words, is that they view mass migration to the United States from Mexico in completely different terms than we do. We view it as kind of this organic thing that happens. People are looking for jobs. Mexican officials look at it very differently. They actually view it as a reconquista or a retaking of territory that they used to own. And it's so shocking. Alex, I'm just going to give one quote. I could read dozens just to illustrate this point. This is from Mexican Senator Felix Salgado. He is with the Morena party, the ruling party. He sits on the National Defense Committee, most powerful committee in the Mexican Senate. He said this just a couple of years ago, quote, Mexicans are in our territory. California, Nevada, Texas, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Wyoming. We're going to take back the territory that was stolen from us. End quote. And literally, I could read dozens of quotes from Mexican presidents, top aides, other politicians. Their view is that mass migration gives them an opportunity to extend their sovereignty in the United States, and they're actually doing it. There are right now people that are sitting in the Mexican Senate and in their Chamber of Deputies, their Congress, who live full time in the United States, and their job is to represent Mexicans in our country in the Mexican parliament. So they're already subverting our sovereignty. That was, I think, the other shocking thing from the book
Yeah, and I
to me.
know that you spend a couple of chapters on Mexico. I think it's phenomenal. I appreciate your work. One of the things also I wanted to ask you is um, there was some legislation that has not gotten any traction, but given what you've done, I kind of wanted you to weigh in on this. It was like Rick Scott introduced something, maybe you're familiar with it, but it has to do with like surrogacy laws and trying to keep some of these foreign adversaries. You talk about like CCP elite, like do we know do we know how many CCP families, for example, or even like Mexican government family members, Muslim brother, like any of the actual, I guess, like I don't know if I want to use rulers or those in charge are utilizing either surrogacy laws or birth tourism. Do we have any sort of stat specifically on that, like drilling it down to, I guess, the top?
Great question. So, take for example the Mexican drug cartels. The Sinaloa cartel, leader El Chapo. He in 2012 flew his wife Emma to the United States to Los Angeles so that his twins would be born in the United States and be U.S. citizens. That was explicitly done in 2012. It was discovered after the fact. You look at the other the other cartel that operates in Mexico right now. It is headed by a U.S. citizen who is a Mexican national who was born in the United States. So you actually have criminal networks now that are involved among its senior leadership, U.S. citizens who have exploited this. As far as China is concerned, they are exploiting this on a massive scale. You have the issue of birth tourism, where you fly your wife or your girlfriend to give birth here. The additional problem you mentioned, surrogacy, which is the Rick Scott bill. This is a case where foreign elites hire American women to carry their child for them. And we don't have any numbers on this. We found just in Southern California, there are 107 Chinese owned surrogacy companies. And let me just give you two examples, anecdotal examples that are shocking. One involves a Chinese billionaire who owns a video game company. He's close to the CCP. He was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal about 12 weeks ago. In that article, his aides confirmed that he has more than 100 children born by
That's
surrogacy in the
crazy.
United States. Just this one guy. They're all US citizens. There's another Chinese national CCP official lives in Southern California who they uncovered had a compound. He has 26 children that are birthed by surrogate mothers for him. And he's bragged in the Chinese media that his goal is for one of them to one day become president of the United States. So this is not random. This is very specific by these elites.
You just kind of hit on it. Like you talked about Mexico with trying to get back land or the presidency, national security concerns. When you're a citizen, of course, you can vote in our elections, right? So that's another aspect. Why, I guess to people who say, well, why would I care? Like, why does it matter what somebody from China comes and has a kid and then leaves? What are the dangers? And then why in mass numbers like 100? For example.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
just rings an alarm bell.
Yeah, it's ironic, by the way, Alex, that California, which regulates so many things, has 0 regulations on surrogacy. So you could have 1,200 kids if you wanted to. You could hire women to do all this stuff in California. It's a little crazy. Look, the main dangers are, number 1, as you mentioned, if you are a US citizen, because you were born here, but you've never lived here. You were raised in communist China. When you turn 18, you can still vote in elections. It's very, very easy to establish a residency in a state. All you need to do is, list a PO box or a apartment as your residence. And there have already been cases found where an apartment was listed as a residence for 21 foreign nationals who were U.S. citizens voting in U.S. elections. So it's very, very easy to do. That's the first part of it. And if you were talking about, according to Chinese estimates, 1 million potential US voters that are living in China, let's remember the 2016 election that Donald Trump won over Hillary Clinton. That was won by what, 72,000 votes? So a million is a huge number of votes, especially when you look at the way swing states operate in America today. The other problem, of course, is that if you are a U.S. citizen, you get U.S. benefits. You also get the ability to get U.S. jobs, even sensitive
Yeah.
jobs in the U.S. government. So it's an enormous problem. So the bottom line is, why do we want somebody to be declared a U.S. citizen that's never lived here, has no emotional connection to it, has been raised in an enemy country to dislike the United States? Why do we want these people to be declared US citizens? It's insanity.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think Rick Scott's bill could go further than surrogacy when we're talking about, like, this birthright tourism issue, but, like, it just wants to ban foreign adversaries. I don't know how it doesn't have more sponsors. I think it's just him and, Senator Sullivan, if I recall right. It just seems like a no-brainer, and I don't it seems like a bipartisan issue when we're talking about the national security concerns that you've brought up. My last question I was gonna ask is looking forward, you mentioned, the Solicitor General used some of your stats in oral arguments. What's happening with the president, maybe Secretary of State Rubio? What knowledge do you have of what they're doing to try to, I guess, fix this? And how big of a deal is the upcoming Supreme Court ruling on birthright citizenship? Like, is that are we kind of waiting to see what happens with that before we know how to like another way to tackle this?
It's a great question. So there are a couple of things going on. One is we know that the Department of Homeland Security and ICE have started cracking down on birth tourism. And the approach they're taking, I think, is very sensible given right now the question of birthright citizenship and where this fits. The heart of birth tourism is when a pregnant woman comes from overseas to the United States for birth tourism, they fill out the visa and they say they're coming as a tourist. They're lying on their visa application, and they're told to do this by the birth tourism companies. So what Homeland Security and DHS are doing is they're going after these birth tourism companies for visa fraud. And people have already ended up in jail for doing this. So that is very, very important. You see in the state of Texas, the Attorney General there, Ken Paxton, has now is investigating birth tourism, Chinese birth tourism occurring in Houston, Texas. So there are things that are happening on the state level. In my state where I live right now, Florida, there has been legislation introduced to deal with birth tourism at the state level. So there are actions taking place. I think a lot of it's going to come down to what does the Supreme Court decide into this issue of birthright citizenship. I might be wrong. I'm always accused of being an optimist. I think they're probably going to come down and sort of split it in half. I think they may say you cannot do this by executive order, but Congress can limit the scope of birth tourism. And the reason I'm thinking this is Justice Kavanaugh was asking, I think it was Ms. Wang, the attorney for the ACLU, are there any restrictions on birth tourism? And she said no. And he was sort of surprised by that and saying, "You're saying that we can't limit this in any way?" And I was struck by his tone because I think Kavanaugh is one of those guys that is kind of in the middle. So I
Yes.
would think that the court may come back and say, "Can't do it by executive order, it's too sweeping," but Congress can
Could do
limit the
X, Y,
scope
and
of birth
Z.
control.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly right.
and I think you're right. I think it was what was it? Kavanaugh did something similar with the tariffs ruling when he kinda laid out in his concurrence a way that President Trump can, achieve what he needs to achieve, but maybe through a different realm, and hopefully we see something like that. When I was in the courtroom, I was a little worried about, how it was looking for President Trump, for the Solicitor General. So we'll have to see. Of course, it's always hard to guess what they're gonna do, but I wanna say thank you so much. It's right in time for summer. Everyone can go out and buy a book. We all want our beach reads. And it's important, I think, given that we know the Supreme Court ruling is coming probably in the next 2 months or so, that people understand just how big of an issue this is. I was very shocked, unfortunately, when the Chief Justice did make that comment because at the heart of this mass migration comes the issue of, I mean, like, birthright citizenship it's very problematic, and the stats are all over the place. You can't really find anything to really lean on. Like, how big of a problem it is. I think some people try to diminish it.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. The federal government says we have no idea because on a birth certificate, all of us that are parents, when you get a birth certificate, it does not list the nationality of the parents. So we literally have no idea. Again, I look at the Chinese numbers, the Chinese government, Chinese research firms. There's a professor in Australia, Professor Barbonas, who's close to the Chinese. He travels and lectures there all the time. They've all given these numbers. None of them have a reason to exaggerate. If anything, they would have an incentive to downplay the extent of it. So I think those are the most reliable numbers, and they are quite shocking as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your work and thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Keep up the great work, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of Court Watch. If you have not subscribed yet to this podcast, please do so, and also feel free to email me interesting questions or topics that you want explored about the legal reporting world. I'll do my best to answer them during each episode. Listen to my podcast, Court Watch, at washingtontimes.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon.